fast. It was good. It was quite a. I did a good little bit of running in the Petoskey parade, which is probably good for me. The hard thing is that when you're my size, there's kind of like there's good for you, and then suddenly very not good for you. And
the line between good for you and deadly.
Yeah.
It's a little thin.
And I might have been closer to the line of not being very good for me after we finished the run, which was a run for me. Everybody else was on the float, kind of singing, and I was like trying to keep the front and the back of the float together. Not everybody else. Ray was jogging along. Kara was jogging along on the side, right? But I was kind of doing I was kind of making sure the front singers and the back singers were at the same spot, which was fun. And I was also singing, which is not, yes. So then, which was okay. So I ran out of energy right at the end of the parade, which is exactly how you want to do it. I had not factored in that I was then going to have to walk up the hill from City Grill to the high school. That was the part that was not in, and especially in the out of the shade. It was all direct sunlight, almost all of it.
No, not really. There were some trees.
There were some trees.
Yeah.
Yeah, every so often.
Very steep hill.
It is. So there was a point where I was just wanting the girls to just go up and be with everybody, and I would just find a nice shady spot in the grass and probably lay down. Maybe sleep, maybe not sleep. Anyway.
Have you ever wondered why the Petoskey parade goes so fast? Going back a whole bunch of years, Governor Milliken was in a white convertible going down the hill really slow when the brakes went out. So they don't put people with brakes. They don't slow things down on the hill because they don't want the brakes to go out because you don't want to kill the governor.
Okay.
I was there that day.
There you go. That's part of it. So yeah, it was interesting. So, but happy 4th of July. Afterwards, after we stripped the sound off the trailer and got it back here, I slept on the couch out here. We had a nice, easy time up here at the church. So that was all good. Yeah, so it all went well. All right, so today, let me just tell you, today has been a problem. Because there were just so many rabbits to chase. And this slide deck that was about 60 slides became about 100 slides, and then back down to about 6, I don't know, I'm shaving stuff off. There is just so much stuff. So I cut slides down and made them readable and short, but here is my thing. I'm going to be making some arguments that you don't often hear. Just like the Bereans, don't just trust because I say it. Go back. Look. Read for yourself. Weigh it out. How many of you have read 1984? If you have not read it, 1984, let me just say that Orwell makes a point in 1984 that if you can control the language, you control people. And we see that a lot. So what I'm going to be saying, I'm going to be saying some phrases, and you hear them a lot. There's a phrase that has been very useful politically for some people, where they say Christian nationalism. And it's the bugaboo that they use, that they throw around. They say Christian national, Christian national, Christian national. And what it means in its usage is, if you're a Christian, shut up. You have no voice in the American government. That's what it's used for. It doesn't make any sense. It's Christian national, and the reason they use it is because nationalism sounds like Nazis. Christian nationalists, not Nazis. Nazis are socialists. nationals. If you're a socialist globalist, you're a communist. That's the reality. Communism is globalism mixed with socialism. Fascism is socialism mixed with nationalism. It's the National Socialist Party. Just so you know, it's all socialism. It's all control, state control. That's the idea. And it's godless state control. Just throw it out there. Some people don't know this. They just throw the terms around to shut people up. I'm going to use another phrase. Christian nation. What does that mean? I'm going to make the point that America is a Christian nation. Now, some people think that what I'm saying when I say America is a Christian nation means that I am saying because America is a Christian nation, you've got to be an American to go to heaven. That is not what American is a Christian nation is. American is a Christian nation does not also mean that we're always right because we're America. That's not what I mean when I say America is a Christian nation. When I say America is a Christian nation, I am saying that America is judged not on whether or not it represents itself better than other nations. I'm saying that America will be judged by whether or not we follow our King, Christ. In the Bible, there are several nations that are judged. Like, for example, Habakkuk makes the point, God, how can the Babylonians conquer Judah because the Babylonians are godless? God makes the point that because Judah was supposed to be a nation under God, Judah was being judged more harshly. When I say America is a Christian nation, that doesn't get us off the hook because we have the American flag. It means we will answer to God for our nation's bill. It doesn't mean, so when I say, yes, America is a Christian nation, I'm saying, therefore, we need to make sure that we represent Christ in all things. Does that make sense? I'm going to make a case. I'm going to throw some things out there. Again, the ancient words, it's not the ancient words, the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is important not because it's a great document of human thing. The parts of the Declaration of Independence that matter not because Thomas Jefferson was a great writer. They matter because there is a truth underneath it that they are resting. And that truth, if the truth is not, as this verse says, unless the Lord builds a house, the work of the builders is wasted. Does that make sense? So we're celebrating 250 years of this document, this idea. And it was a significant idea. It's a great idea. And it's one that sometimes we forget. So probably one of the things we should do is remind ourselves. Because it means that we don't get to do things just because we want to do them. It's not because all of us decide, hey, it would be really nice to do this one thing. We have to then struggle and say, is doing this one thing a good representation of those people who follow Christ? I know you hear things bad about America because you say, oh my gosh, America is a land that has been expanded by conquest. But the reality is every nation has been expanded by conquest. You say, oh my God, America was a nation built on slavery. That is a stupid argument. Because at the time of the American founding, all nations had slavery. America is the only nation, by the way, that fought a war to unenslave people. Very interesting. And the appeals why we should not have slavery was because that is not a good representation of Christ. That's the reason that we got rid of slavery, was because we can't be a Christian nation and adhere, even if slavery was everywhere else. By the way, you're like, oh, but the British people, they got rid of slavery before America. Is that true? Yes, it is. A few decades before us. But the reason they did is because their queen, Queen Victoria, got serious about her faith and decided that she could not be the queen of a Christian nation that had slaves. It's the same idea. Does that make sense? So why it's important to talk about why we're going to this is because we actually see it in the Bible a few times. In the Bible, Judah and Israel are judged because they were founded to be cities on the hill, if you will. And what God judged them for was they did not represent the faith in their function. We look at how does this happen? Well, it happens a few times in history, but I'm just going to first of all, look at Josiah. You know who Josiah was in Judah? Okay, what's that? Okay, so they've got a bunch of different kings in Jerusalem and Judah, and they're running around. Josiah, he became king at like 8 years old. But one of the famous things that they have with Josiah is Josiah got their country back on track. He didn't do it, by the way, when he was 8 years old. He started reigning at 8 years old, and it wasn't until he was 26 that, he was a nice guy at 8, but at 26 was when he was all of a sudden, he's like, hey, what's that building over there? And they're like, that used to be the temple to Yahweh. Oh, why isn't the temple now? Because it had been worshiping pagan gods. So they went in there and they got rid of all that, and they cleaned off all of that crap. They got rid of it. They got rid of all the idols. They got all this. And once they got into it, the people that were in there discovered the Bible, hiding in a corner. Now, did this mean that they didn't have the Bible elsewhere in the nation? No, it means that they didn't have it in that building, because that building for 2 generations had been owned by pagans. And because they were trying to reform their country, they had forgotten the basis of their country in 2 generations. How did it happen? Because Hezekiah famously is the guy who's praying for the salvation of his land, and he sees the shadow go the wrong direction and knows they're gonna get spared, and that's Hezekiah. And then he lives for a while and it looks great, but then Hezekiah dies, and his son comes in and undoes all that work for 55 years. And then after him, his grandson comes in and works. Another 2 years destroying. So their nation has forgotten who they were. And by the way, they weren't the first ones. Before them, Israel had done the same thing. The 10 tribes in the north had forgotten and got judged. So they have this national restoration that happens. So Hilkiah is the high priest, right? He goes in the temple, he finds it, and he finds the scroll, and they open it up and they go, oh my gosh! This isn't good, right? When the king had heard that there was a written book of the law, he tore his clothes. When he read what was in the law, he's like, oh my gosh, our nation was founded to be different. He said, and then he gave the order to the priest to gather up everybody. What he does, he does a lot of cool stuff. Then he summons, that word. He summons, it's hard for me to say that. He summons the elders. Who are the elders? The elders are all the mayors and all the leaders, all the village heads, all those people, all of them. He brings them all in. And he brings in everybody that's a priest. He pulls them all in. And then what's he do? He reads the Bible to them, along with the priests and prophets, all the people from least to greatest. There the king read aloud the entire, that's a certain, there you go. You want that? Today we're going to read the whole Bible. It's a long book. And the king then took his place of authority beside the pillar and renewed the covenant of the Lord. Because what he saw is he saw his leadership was a covenant, an argument, or an agreement between God and man. He pledged to obey the Lord in keeping all his commands, laws, and decrees, and with all of his heart and all his soul. And in this way, he confirmed all the terms of the covenant that were written in the scroll, and all the people pledged themselves to the covenant. So their government was seen as connected to this. And by the way, before you say, yeah, but that's Israel, if you read through the Old Testament, oftentimes it talks about nations doing the same sort of thing. That nations would ultimately, the plan was ultimately nations would come to that relationship under God. It's why we call Jesus King of, yes. In Ezekiel, we see that not all nations will. We see that there's going to be a point where some nations submit and follow, and some nations rebel. It's the reality. I swear there's new batteries in it. I changed them. Steve told me to change the batteries before, and then they died. He was right. I should have changed them again. But I just changed them a little while ago. So it only took them 2 generations to forget. And by the way, it's not the first time that happened. Actually, before Hezekiah, I talked about Hezekiah, but if we go a few generations before Hezekiah, they had a queen. And what did she do? She went around and she not only did she get rid of worshiping Yahweh, she also killed the royal family. And then all the babies that might replace her. She wasn't a nice cat. And led their nation into rebellion for a little while. As a matter of fact, later on, it's a priest that kind of rallies and protects the young descendant, and eventually they restore it. He's another Yahweh named priest that helps, or Yahweh named king that moves everything back. So it's easy for a nation that is supposed to be submissive to God's plan to end up having, I'm using this verse out of context, but I'm just throwing it out there, to seek to have kings like the rest of the world. That's true. So when we look at it, I'm going to be making a case about why we need to be repenting. Why we need to recognize that as a nation we have a higher calling. Because America was a great experiment. It really is. It was not unique within this idea of Christendom. As a matter of fact, there was a lot of that. We'll be looking at some of that. I'll throw some of that and I'll throw there. But 1776 was a really important moment for us. And as a nation, how do I say this the best way? Jesus, our most important relationship is our submission to God, right? That is the most important relationship. But that isn't the only relationship that God gives us. Other relationships are also responsibilities, but they're important underneath that. Does that kind of make sense? So again, everything, patriotism is a good thing. Patriotism is not a bad thing. It's only a bad thing if it's more important to be patriotic than to be Christian. Just like your roles and responsibilities to your family are important. But if your roles and responsibilities are viewed higher than your relationship to Christ, then it's idolatry. Same sort of thing. So that's kind of where we're talking. So, when we hear about America, how many of you heard America is a Christian nation? How many of you have heard that America was not a Christian nation? Also heard that, right? Because it's out there. Sometimes people have taught that America was a secular nation, essentially a godless nation. I'm just going to throw this as a historian, not as a pastor, let me tell you. They're confusing revolutions. There was a revolution that was a secular revolution led by deists. That was the French Revolution. The revolution that was led by Christians was the American Revolution. One of the reasons that this is out there, well, there's two reasons. One is ignorance, and one is malice. Modern scholars, a lot of modern scholars, teach that America was a secular nation, was essentially not a Christian nation. And they do that partly because they don't recognize. Sometimes it's people ignorant. How many of you have heard this quote from Abraham Lincoln? A house divided cannot stand. How many of you heard that's Abraham Lincoln's quote? Heard it all day long. Is that Abraham Lincoln's quote? What's that? It is from the Bible. Jesus says that.
Yep.
So one of the problems is that when the founding fathers quote the Bible, they do it so often and so naturally that scholars who don't know the Bible don't recognize the quote. So they start thinking that these guys were great men having great ideas on their own. When they weren't. They were quoting scripture at each other. That's ignorance. It's also possible it's malice. That there are some people that have a bone to grind, or a axe to grind with God, a bone to pick. I merge those together, bone to grind, I guess. So sometimes it's the Orwellian idea of reshaping the argument to mislead people. As you're looking, different presidents, there's a lot of quotes. And here's my problem. Because the same thing I'm doing, they do too. They throw quotes up. But a text without a context is a pretext. So I'm going to throw up these quotes, hoping that they represent the larger context. Now, I did more reading. That's part of the reason the rabbit holes I fell into was because I would continue to read the original document, which is a lot. So then my slides were the entire original document, and then I'm like, this is way too much for you guys. So here's the deal. Go to the footnote. Go to the places. Does Reagan say this? Yes, he does say America was founded by people who believed in their God, and it was the rock of safety. Anytime you see those ellipses, though, always get nervous about them. Dot, 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 dot. What's in the dot, dot, dots? Sometimes the dot, dot, dots are a list of names, but sometimes they're not. So sometimes you have to go there. I think it's all right to keep asking if we're on his side. Who is he quoting there? Dot, 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 dot. He is quoting Lincoln in that quote that we made of Lincoln, where he said, I don't ask whether or not God is on our side, I ask whether or not we're on his side. So Reagan is actually quoting Lincoln. That's why we still ask. That's that. Keep asking. The more we read, the more we understand this. Boy, it's good to be well read. It's good to look out there. We can go back in time from mid-20th century, Truman, the president at the end of World War I, said the fundamental basis of this nation's laws were given to Moses on the Mount. What's he talking about? He's talking about the Torah, right? Yeah. Basis of American law is the Torah. John Kennedy, the rights of man come from the centricity don't come from the centricity of the state, but from the. Who is he quoting? That he's quoting the Declaration of Independence. That we have these rights, inalienable rights from the Creator. But who's the Declaration of Independence quoting? Romans chapter 13. It's important to know where we're standing all of these things, how all of these things are nested. Go back, Calvin Coolidge earlier, Herbert Hoover, so earlier in the 20th century. The foundations of a society and our government rest so much on the teachings of the Bible. Herbert Hoover, the whole inspiration of our civilization springs from the teachings of, oh my goodness. Here's a spread. Oh, there's another Reagan one snuck in there. America was founded on the people who believe in God. Was the rock? That one. I can skip this one. Oh, James Buchanan entered this great office. I must humbly invoke the God of our fathers, whose wisdom for wisdom and His guidance. Abraham Lincoln. U.S. We'll push more. We'll see more quotes later. Andrew Jackson. That book, sir, is the rock upon which the Republic rests. He says the Republic rests on which book? The Bible. Zachary Taylor, it was the love of the truths of this great book, meaning the Bible, that our fathers abandoned their native shores. Is that true? That is absolutely true historically. If we get time to it. The charters, if you read the charters that establish all the colonies, all of them, that we're going to show up there. I'm going to show 3 of them just as the first and second English colonies. I'm going to show those charters in another one. But in all of them is an evangelistic call. But one of the things that I was going to put up there, but I didn't. So many things to put up there. Christopher Columbus saw the call of crossing the ocean and saw these sturdy people here, the Indians, not as a place of labor for Europeans, but as a people who could be won for Christ. Religion, Teddy Roosevelt, religious is the basis, religion specifically, Christianity. America was born a Christian. Woodrow Wilson, great Democrat, Woodrow Wilson. America was born a Christian nation derived from the revelations of the Holy Scripture. How can he make that case? Because if you read the Federalist Papers, all the time they're quoting Scripture as their sense of authority. They're not saying, hey, I've got this new great idea, we should do this. Capitalism is not the idea of some man that's like, hey, maybe all of a sudden you should own the work of your hands. Capitalism is, hey, we think the system right here makes sense because you are responsible and answerable for the talents that God has put in your hands. That's the idea. That's it. It's not somebody has a better way to build a mousetrap. It's that they're trying to, more correctly, as the Constitution says, to create a more perfect nation. That's the goal. Advances. So we see, and I'm going to show you this. This is just a quick search pulls up this one. Who was this? Was the I don't remember the author of this. This is, of course, Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine. Is Thomas Paine a founding father? Yes. He is one of the founding fathers. Is he the only founding father? No. And Thomas Paine, by the way, when people say the founding fathers were deists, Thomas Paine was an anti-Christian deist. Absolutely. But not at the time of the Revolution. But this argument that the founding fathers were not a Christian nation according to our forefathers, this is the argument. This is an example of the arguments that are used. So George Washington said it best, right? If not first, right? That's the author's statement. He says, religious controversies are always more productive of acrimony and irreconcilable hatred than those with which spring from other causes. To prevent such controversies, George Washington ordered the Continental Army commanders to protect and support the free exercise and undistributed enjoyment of religious matters. That text is out of context. That is the opposite of what Washington did. Washington was a very devout man. We'll see that a little bit. He didn't want, so when they see free exercise, they're thinking of the way that we say free exercise now, which means you don't have to get up and go to church. That's not how Washington viewed it. Washington views religion central. We'll see what he really believed here in a second. And then it said his friend, Thomas Paine. So did he know Thomas Paine? Yes. But he's trying to paint him with the Thomas Paine brush. Thomas Paine said, I don't believe in any church. As a matter of fact, he becomes very anti-Christian. So he's linking Washington to Paine, but that's not how it works. Do any of you have friends that don't believe in God?
Yes.
Does that mean you don't believe in God? Ugly way of doing it. By the way, Thomas Paine, we'll look at him in a second. And then let's see, James Madison. They're like, see, he says the civil government could not stand without the prop of religious, by the way, this is his idea, religious establishment, that the Christian church itself would perish if not supported by the legal provision of clergy. See, that's what he's saying. So Madison believed that the church was necessary. He's misquoting Madison. Madison, very devout man also. Quotes the Bible all the time. He doesn't make this argument. What he's doing is he's making Karl Marx's argument that religion is the opiate of the masses. And he finds a quote that sounds close enough like it so he could use the Marxist argument against religion. It is not indeed what Madison says. Devotion to the people has been manifestly increased by the total separation of church from state. That total separation, that's wrong, that's incorrect. They believed every institution was submissive and underneath God. They were concerned that an institution could have the name of God but forget what it's pointing to. That's true of churches and that's true of nations. We can do that. We can become a church that sees feeding hungry people very important, but forget to feed them spiritually. And then we still have on the name a church, but we're a meals program. It's dangerous. It's dangerous to do that. The last one. Oh, this is unfair. Ben Franklin. Oh, this quote makes me crazy. Both Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson agree. Thomas Jefferson, who denied that Jesus was a member of the Godhead, and Ben Franklin, a co-author of the Declaration of Independence with Jefferson, decried Christian church participation for promoting church membership instead of trying to make us good citizens. An outspoken deist, he was not, by the way, that is total lie, that's total fabrication. I'll show it elsewhere. Franklin criticized all religions for making orthodoxy more regarded than virtue. Both Thomas Jefferson and and Ben Franklin actually are making biblical arguments. Both in these cases, Franklin and we'll look at Jefferson where he does it. But Franklin's statement here of being an outspoken, he's not that orthodoxy more important than virtue. What he's saying is, I don't care what you believe, I care how you act. Who does that sound like? James. So when Ben Franklin quotes the idea of faith without works is dead, they say, see, he doesn't believe in the Bible. He absolutely believes in the Bible.
Well, you had people like Franklin was far from what would you say, like a great example of how to live the Christian life or whatever. You get what I'm saying? Like,
maybe.
But all of his fun, like you were just pointing out, he's still basing all on.
We'll come back. I'll tell you, this week I've been reading so much of like original documents, and I encourage you all to do it because it's inspiring. It is inspiring to see what these men, some women, but mostly men at this point, of faith did, what they risked, and why they risked it. So when we see this, we see, so we'll come back to Jefferson. Oh, no, I'll just throw Jefferson out right here. Jefferson, his argument was he was mad because these people who feign metaphysical obedience to Christ don't live as disciples of Christ. And Jefferson's response is, listen, I pulled out all of Christ's moral teachings and I try to live that every day. Don't point to me to these other people that are, he calls them Platonic, anyway, he essentially calls them disciples of Plato, who kind of believe, Plato has this idea that there's a spiritual and the physical, and that those are sometimes separate. So in other words, they can speak spiritual things, but then behave awful to other people. And Jefferson says you ought not do that. You know who also says that? Jesus says that also. And also James. It's also in the Old Testament. Yes. Or it's Paul when he says the people that don't have the law that obey the law. Anyway, as you start reading this, listen, I thought much worse of Jefferson last week before I started reading this. I thought much worse of Franklin until I started reading Franklin. I mean, and it's not, I'm not saying that they don't have problems in their theology.
That was my point, was we see where they haven't followed, and then we just put them in that category where they're completely separate from faith. And that's that. You can do the same thing to each of us. We all have times where we falter. We all have weaknesses. We've all done things that are contrary to our faith at times, but that doesn't completely separate us from faith.
And that's the whole thing. Whether or not Adams and Jefferson disliked each other and are having a fight in letters and they're throwing stuff out there, oftentimes what they're doing is they're pulling the Bible. You're missing it because of this. You're missing it because of this. All right, so Washington, that guy that they're talking about here a second ago. Hey, Washington was a Freemason, for all of us that are going to get all upset about that. But part of being a Freemason is you have to be an adherent of, at that time, most of the time, a Christian church. But they have some sketchy stuff in there. All right, so this is the thing that the quote he said, religious controversies, and it's thrown around a lot. So because Washington says religious controversies are a source of fighting, and we should never do religion. That's not what he said. Here, this is his first general order. This is from his first general order, which, see the date of that? July 9th. So after they founded the army on the 5th, right? The July 5th, they get the army. So his first order that he sends out there, his first general order, the second paragraph, he talks about chaplains. We need to get chaplains out to every regiment. We'll pay them $33. 33 in third order, but people of lesser grade need to render obedience, or essentially it's calling them officers. Yeah, he actually might be putting them at the same rank as colonel, which is really interesting. Because it kind of suggests like they have the regimental authority as a chaplain. But he says this, right? Then he makes this. This is why. The why of his statement. The blessing and protection of heaven are at all times necessary, but especially so in times of public distress and danger. The general, who is the general? Washington, hopes and trusts that every officer and man will endeavor to live and act as becomes a... Oh, I thought he didn't like religion. By the way, he defended Washington. This isn't a one-off. Washington is very involved in religious matters. As a matter of fact, you would either love or hate being a chaplain under Washington, because Washington got involved. He got upset at his chaplains because he goes around, there's not any chaplains. He's like, there's one point where I couldn't find any chaplains. This is me paraphrasing it. He goes, they were all gone because they didn't think they were important. He goes, from now on, only 1/3 of my chaplains can be gone at any time. Because my chaplains need to be, and they better be out there. They better be providing service. They better be visiting the sick in the hospitals. That's Washington. Yeah, he would have been all in your business. He was, because he thought it was critically important. At Valley Forge, he writes this. He says, the zealously performing the duties of a good soul, citizen and soldier, we certainly ought not be intended to the higher duties of religion. I thought Washington didn't like religion. No, it's a very specific one. He says, to the distinguished character of patriot, it should be our highest glory to add the more distinguished character of being not spiritual. Yeah, Washington. All right, so here you go. Author of the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson said, the reason that Christianity is the best friend of government is because Christianity is the only religion that changes the heart. Thomas Jefferson, he's sometimes they talk about it because they're like, oh, the Jefferson Bible. It's like pulled out parts of the Bible. Okay. There's actually two kind of reasons for it. There's potentially two different Jefferson Bibles, but they have different purposes. One of them was essentially the red letter teachings of Christ. It was a collection of the teachings of Christ that he put out there. So it was so that he could see whether or not he is obeying Jesus. It wasn't him saying, I don't believe in miracles. Because the other version that we also have in the Jefferson Bible has miracles in it. But it is an expurgated version. It is a shortened version, not without miracles. It still has miracles in it, but it's shortened and softened so that he could teach it to the Indians. It's essentially the chosen. He's looking for a way to reach Indians that could be easily taught and easily shared. That's evangelistic. Isn't that interesting about Jefferson? Jefferson, boy, there's a lot that I found out. Do you know Jefferson in 1767 proposed to the Virginia House an Emancipation Proclamation? So I did 1767. So before Declaration of Independence, he tried to get slaves freed in Virginia. His first version of the Declaration of Independence included that. Slavery was one of the reasons why we thought we should get the king's covering of slavery was one of the reasons why he said we should no longer follow the king, because slavery was against the laws of God. Interesting, isn't it? For a man that's... Hey, did he own slaves?
Yes.
He did. But we got it's hard for us to step into the idea is you start with the world that you're in and you hopefully change it towards something better. So yes, there we go. We got complexity. With Madison, this is again the Madison that they're like, Steve Madison doesn't let they wanted to make him the opiate of masses guy. He's not. He says, we have staked the whole future of the American civilization, not on the power of government, far from it. We have staked the whole of our political institutions upon the capacity of mankind to self-government, upon the capacity of each and all of us to govern ourselves according to the commandments of God. The future and success of America is not in the Constitution, but in the laws of God upon which the Constitution is founded. So Madison said the Constitution is founded on the laws of God. Well, who's Madison? Madison's the writer of the Constitution. Deism. I thought this quote was useful from Britannica. Scholars trained in research university have generally argued that the majority of founding fathers were religious rationals or Unitarians. Pastors, on the other hand, pastors and other writers who identify themselves as evangelicals have claimed not only that most founders held orthodox beliefs, but are also were born again. Some were born again Christians. So he's like, here you go. If you go talk to a professor, they're going to tell you that they're rationalists, and they're not. Well, here's the deal. Read what they say. Again, if you're ignorant of the Bible, you won't recognize when they're quoting the Bible. You also don't recognize. Listen, if somebody says providence means
the hand of God. It means God working in the universe. And I dare you to read a founding father and not find providence. So who are the deists? The deists were Thomas Paine. But his first two works that came out before the revolution, he doesn't attack Christianity. He doesn't get all messed up until he goes to France during the French Revolution, and he listens to this idiot Satanist called Voltaire. Voltaire is flat evil. You read Voltaire, you're like, ugh. I recognize the serpent's voice. It's horrible. So he comes back more screwed up.
And then look what started happening in France.
Yes. Look at the product. The product. So Voltaire subscribes to the idea that you're a god and you can make right and wrong based off of your will. That's not what... all right, so here we go. Oh, this one makes me crazy. This is the quote from Ben Franklin. You'll read it, you'll see it everywhere. Some books against deism fell into my hands. Ellipses, always nervous. It happens that they have wrought an effect in me that's quite contrary to that they were intended. The arguments against deists were quote, which were quote, in other words, to be refuted, appeared much more stronger than the refutation. In short, I soon became a thorough deist. Does Ben Franklin say this? Absolutely. On page 64 of his autobiography. But you know what's great? You can find his autobiography, and this is the beginning of his argument, not the end of his argument. Because I did.
How many pages are in the book?
Oh, I don't know.
A couple lot more.
A lot more.
14
But we're not going. We're not going. I will tell you this. On page 64, he's talking about his time as a youth. Right after this, same page, he says, he talks about how deism failed him. Sorry. Says, I began to suspect that this doctrine, what doctrine? Deism, though it might be true, wasn't very useful. So you only go a couple sentences and suddenly he's no longer a deist or a solid deist. And then, very next sentence, he goes, I doubted whether some of the error, or a couple sentences later, he's like, hey, then he started making all these bad choices. And then he said, wait a second, I doubted whether some of the error that had insinuated itself unperceived into my argument, so as to affect all that followed, as so common in metaphysical reasonings. So he gets two phrases down. He's like, deism caused all these problems in my life. And I'm like, wait a second, maybe something was wrong. So then he says this. Then he has the epiphany. This is Ben Franklin. He's a great writer, but he's a bit wordy. He says, I entertained an opinion that though certain actions might not be bad because they were forbidden by it, or good because they were commended by it, but these actions were forbidden because... All right, let me paraphrase it. He said, wait a second, he thought that maybe the Bible was saying things are bad and things are good because God wanted to outlaw things and say things are good. And he started to realize that maybe it wasn't like that maybe God wasn't telling us to not do certain things because he didn't want us to have fun, and telling us to do other things because he was a killjoy. He started to go, wait a second, maybe he is telling us not to do these things because they're bad for us. And these things that he's telling us to do is good isn't because he's just ordering and commanding us. He's not, you're not the boss of me. It's not that. It's like he's saying these are good for us because they are good for us. So then, very next paragraph, where's the, okay, a very next sentence. And this persuasion, this kind of, what's he called? A hand of providence. So he recognized that God reasoned him back to the faith. He says, or some guardian angel, or accidental favorable circumstance or situation altogether preserved me, not from deism, but from deism. Does that make sense? And by the way, hand of providence means God is working in the universe. Deism says God does not work in the universe. So the word providence is opposite of deism. So he's grateful. He goes, as was sometimes in among strangers remote from the eye. Anyway, so essentially he makes the argument that he essentially comes back to faith. He makes a lot of really cool arguments. He also argues, Ben Franklin elsewhere, he makes an argument that within the colonies, that people are better behaved because their kids believe the faith of their parents. And it's an observation that he makes that's different in Europe. That there's, within the colonies, there's a more important, I read this about, or I talked to you about Thomas Jefferson. Platonist, that's what he said. My watch is trying to re-educate me on Thomas Jefferson. All right, boy, all these things. All right, so what did the founding fathers believe? George Washington. It's impossible to rightly govern the world without God and the Bible. That's Washington. Adams. Suppose a nation in some distant region should take the Bible, bear as their only law book. What a utopia or paradise that would be. If any nation raises the Bible as their law book. John Quincy Adams, I have myself as for many, that should be not many years, made it a practice to read through the Bible at least once every year. Jefferson, God who gave us life, gave us liberty. These liberties are the gift of God. By the way, gift of God is a bad word for deists, if you want to make that argument. Deists do not believe in a God that gives gifts.
Because pretty much believe that God
doesn't interact. He's the absentee watchmaker. Madison. Every thinking man realizes that the teachings of the Bible are so interwoven into our whole civic and social life. That is absolutely true. All those are true. Well, where do we see it? Oh, how do we get this way? Boy, I had a lot of stuff. Well, all good stuff. We're not going to talk about it though. The history of the politics of Europe is a history of religious reform. So you have the Protestant Reformation. What's happening is about the same time. You've got it's like universities start happening as the monasteries become functioning places to teach languages so that you could learn the Bible, so that you could learn these things. So you have like the University of Paris, and out of that you have people like John Calvin, and Calvinism sort of starts. So imagine a picture Europe, and you have Henry VIII, who becomes serious about his faith and starts to separate from the Catholic Church for a couple reasons. If you read a history book, it will say because he wants to get a divorce, but he's separating from the Catholic Church almost a decade before he knows he's going to need a divorce. So that is an incorrect argument. Is it, when he finally separates, is it part of it at 10 years later? Yes, but that's not where it starts. Part of it is all of a sudden the Pope starts seeing himself as a subject of Spain, and then he saw England as a subject of the Pope, and Henry VIII says, no, I govern underneath God, not underneath the Pope. That's the beginning of that. That happens a decade before he can't have male children. So that's where the Anglican Church starts kind of at its thing. On the land, you have, on the continent of Europe, you have Martin Luther and his 95 Thesis, where he's like, we're doing stuff in the Catholic Church that doesn't seem to be pointing toward the Bible. And we start seeing him go through, and that's the birth of Lutheranism. And then some of those Lutheran teachings go over onto England and start mixing in with the early Church of England stuff. But it's still not it's almost the Church of England, and suddenly the Church of England, as they separate with Henry VIII and become Protestants there too. But at the same time, John Calvin starts up, and he creates the Calvinists, and they bump over, and in some places you get the group called the Huguenots, which are a group of Protestants living in Catholic France and getting persecuted there. And we start seeing all these people move. And then John Calvin's writings are picked up by a guy named Knox, and he becomes Presbyterian. and they come over to Scotland. So there's a point where England is Protestant, Anglican, Scotland is Presbyterian, and Ireland is Catholic. So they even have a war between those people. And then they have wars between all these things, the Protestant, Catholics, all this sort of stuff is happening. And every time that they come and make a treaty, and they're like, well, these guys aren't doing it according to God. We're trying to make everything going to God. That's kind of the idea. So all of those things were happening. And by the way, as you start getting to the 1600s, every time one of these wars happened, the losers, where do the losers go? They go into hiding into Massachusetts. So we get Catholics that flee in America when they lose against the Protestants. We get Protestant when the Catholics retake and Queen Mary starts persecuting Catholics. Where do they go? The Protestant are persecuting Protestants. Protestants flee to America. We got now within the church, within the English church. The English church is essentially a group that's like, hey, we're trying to do things better according to the Bible. And then, so that's the Church of England, but then there's some people that are like, hey, we got to go even harder and faster. They're the Puritans. They're called the Puritans. So they push to make the Church of England even more pure. So they're trying to get rid of all the stuff that they think is wrong. So the Puritans, that's kind of Oliver Cromwell and stuff. And then there's some folks that are like, listen, we got to start all over. We're going to start our own little group over here. They're separatists, and those people become the Pilgrims. They also become the Baptists. Then when the Church of England gets mad at the Puritans, they push more of them into the Pilgrim world. The Pilgrims flee England. They hide in the Netherlands, and then the French decide they want to kill Huguenots, which were hiding in Netherlands. So the French try to kill the Huguenots. So then they go back to England. There's all kinds of craziness. And then where do they go? America. So that's kind of the deal. But all of them are Christian groups, and they're all trying to make a more perfect union.
Doesn't really speak well for the peace of Christ, does it?
Doesn't speak well for the peace of Christ. It speaks well for people losing sight of Christ. Absolutely. I think that people would be better served by reading not only Romans chapter 13, but chapter 14. The idea of dealing with weaker and stronger brothers. And one of the beauties that we have in America is that they held both Romans 13 and Romans 14 important. So what they wanted is so we have Anglicans sitting in the Church of England members sitting in the same halls with Presbyterians, with Catholics, and all the time when they appeal to each other, they're appealing through God's authority, which is a beautiful thing. Because what they're doing is they're appealing to each other as we're supposed to through Romans chapter 14. So we see that in the writings, which I think is important. Yeah, so we have all these persecutions that happen, and all of that's happening. But by the way, yes, these are some cool oscillations. So many things, so many slides I wanted to play. All right. But America's appeal of being a Christian nation was not the first time that anybody tried to establish a Christian nation. You guys know about the Magna Carta? So the Magna Carta is a religious document. Early on there, it establishes that the church is independent of the king. It's the idea. In other words, the king can be a defender of the faith, but that's the sense that God is higher than the nations. And more than that, the kings within England are limited to only be able to do the things that God would allow them to do, if that makes sense. And that people, landed people, have rights. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that they have there. But if you look at the provisions that are within the Magna Carta, you're going to find a lot of the same things in the Declaration of Independence, where we say, hey, the king is wrong because he did these things. It's a violation of the Magna Carta. That's kind of the idea. If you read, I wouldn't put so much. If you read the opening, the Great Charter of Liberties, John, by the grace of God, King of England. By the way, for those of you that are history geeks, this is the Prince John from Robin Hood. That's who this is. Lord of England, Duke of Normandy, blah, blah, blah. All these places, greetings. And then he says, know that by the will of God and for the health of our souls and those of all of our ancestors and heirs, for the honor of God, the exaltation of the Holy Church, and the reform of the realm by the advice of the Reverend Fathers. In other words, this document is here to do these things, to impart the way that we should live according to God. And then if you notice, who did they get advice from? They got advice from the church. So that's the authority underneath. So the authority underneath the Magna Carta is God's voice. That's their idea. That's their argument. And then you get to all that at the very end. It says, we who have granted and confirmed to all free men of our realm all the liberties written below are held by them and their heirs forever and ever. It's great. Fantastic. There's a lot of really cool stuff in the preamble of that, and then the whole thing coming in. Then also, as you go through, I showed all of those oscillations. So the first Bill of Rights that's really out there is the Bill of Rights in 1689. And they've had these places where the king have persecuted, when they're Catholics, the Protestants. When they're Protestants, they persecuted the Catholics. So the first right to bear arms is in this Bill of Rights. And it is so that the Protestants in England are allowed to bear arms, so that anytime the Catholics might come and wipe them out. So the right to bear arms was tied to religious liberty. Isn't that interesting?
Isn't that like Purim?
Isn't that what?
Isn't that like Purim?
Exactly like Purim. It's Esther.
Yep.
It's Esther in the Bill of Rights. So that when we look at our Constitution and we write out the Bill of Rights, we have the First Amendment has religion. The Second Amendment is for the protection of the First Amendment. So 100 years later, when we write ours, that's why. That's where we got it from. All right, so then we get to the Mayflower Compact. Have you guys read the Mayflower Compact? So this is the contract that the Pilgrims write about Massachusetts colony. So by the grace of God, of course, they're doing that. They say, why are they making this colony? For the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith. That's why Massachusetts is founded. But it's not a Christian nation. In fact, that was a Christian colony.
Yep.
Oh, but it's only Massachusetts. It's only the knuckleheads with the funny hats. No. This combine ourselves with body politics, all the pointing back for the convenient, for the general good of the colony, the year of our Lord, Adonam. I think that's fantastic. Oh, that's a good one, but that's not it. All right, but no, it wasn't just. The first colony was the Virginia colony, right? We greatly commend, blah, 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 for, and this is the purpose. Here go, tend to the glory of his divine majesty in propagating the Christian religion to such people as yet in this darkness and miserable ignorance of the true knowledge of... Wait, you mean Jamestown was founded to bring faith to the Indians?
Yep.
Oh, but it's for gold. No, but it does have a provision for gold, but the provision for gold is this. Listen, you'll be able to make your own coins from whatever metal you find so that you can trade there. So you don't have to rely on us. It's interesting because
Which
a
is
king...
a statement of God will provide for you once you get there.
And it's also a statement of independence of the colony from the crown. If we make a place that can make their own money,
You're separate.
we're establishing it at the very beginning. It's not just Virginia. It's not just this. I'll pull another. Connecticut, that hath pleased the Almighty God to be wise in disposition of his holy province, blah, 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 prefers the liberty and purity of the gospel of the Lord Jesus, which we now profess as the discipline of his churches. So, the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, the colony, 1630, they're all like that. So really what we have is we have this stream of ideas here. As a matter of fact, the First Great Awakening, one of the things it does is it talks about your accountability to God, and you need to take it there. And that led to a lot of what became America, is really a biblical teaching of you have to give account to God for the talents you have. And that's state government. It means that we don't get to just fawn it off on the king. Remember, that's kind of what happened in Judges, right? Right? Is the people stopped wanting to take responsibility for the land that God had given to them, and they're like, if only we had a king, we could just have him be responsible for all these things. But here in America, we're supposed to be responsible for that to the God. So we have these folks like this. I don't know if you've seen these people. That's supposed to be a picture of Whitfield. The churches were the first building that the colonists built. Before they built their houses was their church. The meeting house was the first house that they built. They built their church before they built their homes. A historian called this the Black Robe Regiment. That's the idea of the patriot clergy. This is a picture of the signing of the Declaration. So as they're signing the Declaration of Independence, what's happening? What's that?
Listening to
And he's praying for God's providence. This is one of the paintings in the Capitol. That was hard to it. So the idea, so of course they use like the teachings of establishing after the Exodus. They have those images, right? I am the Lord your God who rescued you from the land. But they also have this: when the godly are in authority, the people rejoice. But the wicked are in power, right? They groan. And it's more than that. It's more than just the high leadership. When the whole celebrates when the godly succeed, for they shout and they shout for joy when the wicked die. Upright citizens are good for a city and make it prosper. In other words, even if you're not in power, being a Christian is advantageous. So now when we get to the Declaration of Independence, the unanimous declaration of 13 colonies of the United States of America, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one person to dissolve their political bands which have connected them to another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station of each, to which the law of nature and nature's God entitles them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the cause and impelled them to separation. That's what they're going to do. And then he continues to say, behold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then to secure these rights, governments are instituted by man to do the things that God would have you do. Where does that come from? Romans chapter 13. That's their basis. Their basis for the Declaration of Independence is Romans chapter 13. Of course, and then they make this argument, and their argument is saying how the king has let them down by the other obligations that they're supposed to, but they're making a large case for why they are right to do this. But they're making a large biblical case. Their argument is to be a biblical case because we don't want to be rebels. We don't want to be rebels. It's not rebels for being the sake of rebels. If you read Saul Alinsky, who's like a communist, like Marxist, I would not have the stones to do this. He calls it the first great rebel. He quotes the first great rebel, and then he says Lucifer. I don't know if I could do that. I don't know. When we did this, we recognized the Bible says we're not supposed to rebel, but also that governments are supposed to do good. So they're like, this is what they're making a religious case. We appeal. So then they say they appeal to the supreme judge of the world for the rectitude in our intention to do. In other words, who they're appealing is not to. They're not wanting to make the king happy or justify their people or whatever. What they're saying is this is their case, they're pleading their case to God. It's not unlike when David sits down and says, I hope God will decide between us and Saul. To do, for the support of this declaration, we firmly reliance on the protection of the hand of God. We mutually, divine providence is what it means. We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortune, and our sacred honor. Romans 13, for everyone submits to the governing authority. For all authority comes from God, and those in position of authority have been placed there by God. So anyone who rebels against authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and they will be punished. That's why we make such a huge case in the Declaration of Independence for why this, in this one case. And that's even why at the very beginning they say you don't get to do it just because you want to. It says you have to have established all these other things for this. It can't be flippant. So that's the argument. For the authorities do not strike fear in people who are doing right, but in those who are doing wrong. Would you like to live without the fear of authority? Would you like to live without the fear of authority? Do what's right. The authorities are God's servants sent to you for good. But if you are doing wrong, of course you should be afraid, for they have the power to punish. So they are God's servants. They're sent for the very purpose of punishing those who do wrong. So we must submit to them, not only to avoid punishment, but also a clear conscience. Now, by the way, the idea in the colonies was the Pilgrims had this idea of the city on the hill. That's what when they were coming here to establish, or establishing a community obedient to God, and in that way lead other nations that way. But it's that's why it says, so we've got the sense of pay your taxes for the same reason the government needs to be paid. They're servants of God to do what they do. Give to everyone what you owe them. Pay your taxes, government fees, and those who collect them. And give respect and honor to those who are in authority. So that's part of Romans 13. But the other part of it also is the idea that a government has certain roles. So then also, because we're members of that government, as voting members of a republic, then we are also responsible for our political rules, the political things that we do. In 1 Corinthians, each of you should continue to live in whatever situation the Lord has placed you, and remain as you were when God first called you. This is my rule for the churches, for instance, a man who is circumcised before he gave a liver should not